Tom had always wanted a pool. He pictured himself lounging by the water, sipping lemonade, and finally feeling cool during the hot summer days. His backyard was just the right size, a patch of green just begging to be transformed into his own private oasis. He'd saved up for years, poring over pool catalogs and watching countless videos online. He finally decided to take the plunge. He rented a small excavator and marked out the area for the pool with bright orange spray paint. He felt a surge of excitement mixed with a little nervousness. This was a big project, the biggest he'd ever undertaken on his property. With a deep breath, Tom fired up the excavator. The engine roared to life and the shovel bit into the earth. Dirt flew and the hole slowly began to take shape. Tom imagined the cool water, the laughter of friends, and the joy of his kids splashing around. This pool wasn't just a pool, it was a dream coming true, a symbol of all his hard work. Little did he know his dream would soon turn into a nightmare, one shovelful at a time. He was completely unprepared for the dark secret buried beneath his ordinary suburban lawn. The first few hours were exhilarating. Tom felt like a kid playing in a giant sandbox. The excavator was surprisingly easy to operate and he made quick progress. But as the hole grew deeper, the work became more challenging. The soil was heavy and dense and the summer sun beat down relentlessly. He started finding things buried in the ground. Old, rusty nails, bits of broken pottery, and even a few antique bottles emerged from the earth. Tom tossed them into a pile, figuring they were just remnants of the house's history. He even unearthed a child's toy car, almost completely rusted, which gave him a strange feeling. The digging was taking longer than he expected. His back ached and his hands were blistered. He began to question his decision to do the work himself. Maybe he should have hired a professional. But he was too stubborn to give up now. He was determined to see his dream through, no matter how hard it got. He wiped the sweat from his brow and pressed on, unaware that the strangest find of all was yet to come, something that would change everything. It was late afternoon when it happened. Tom was about 6 feet down, the hole now resembling a small crater. The excavator bucket struck something solid, a dull thud that resonated through the machine. He initially thought it was a large rock, but the sound was different, more hollow. He carefully maneuvered the excavator to clear away the surrounding dirt. As the earth crumbled away, a dark, rectangular shape began to emerge. It was made of wood, old and weathered, but clearly defined. Tom killed the engine, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He jumped down into the hole, grabbing his shovel. He began to clear away the remaining dirt by hand, his heart pounding in his chest. The object was getting bigger, more distinct. It was long and narrow, about the size of a person. A shiver ran down his spine. Then he saw it. The unmistakable shape of a coffin. An old wooden coffin buried deep beneath his backyard. Tom stared at it speechless, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. This wasn't just an old bottle or a rusty tool. This was something else entirely, something unsettling. The sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the backyard. The coffin lay there, a dark and silent presence in the growing darkness. Tom stood frozen, his mind racing. He knew he had to open it, but the thought terrified him. What if there was a body inside? What if it was something worse? He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He grabbed his shovel and carefully pried at the lid of the coffin. The wood was rotten and brittle and it splintered easily. With a final heave, the lid creaked open, revealing the dark interior. Tom hesitated for a moment, then peered inside. The coffin was filled with dirt and dust. He could see something lying at the bottom, a white shape partially obscured by the debris. He reached in and carefully brushed away the dirt, revealing a skeleton. A complete human skeleton, lying perfectly still. But that wasn't the worst part. As he brushed away more dirt, he saw something else, a small, tarnished metal plate attached to the inside of the coffin lid. He squinted, trying to make out the inscription in the dim light. And then he saw it. His name. Etched in faded letters, Thomas Elwood. Tom stumbled backward, his mind reeling. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. His name on a coffin with a skeleton inside. It was too much to process. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? A bizarre coincidence? Or something far more sinister? He scrambled out of the hole, his legs shaky. He had to tell someone, but who would believe him? He ran inside the house, his heart pounding in his chest. Sarah, his wife, was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "Sarah, you won't believe what I found," he exclaimed, his voice trembling. Sarah turned around, a look of concern on her face. "What is it, Tom? You look like you've seen a ghost." I found a coffin," he stammered. "In the backyard. While I was digging the pool." Sarah raised an eyebrow, a skeptical look on her face. "A coffin? Tom, are you serious?" "I'm dead serious," he insisted. And it had a skeleton inside. And a nameplate. With my name on it? Thomas Elwood. Sarah stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing. Okay, Tom, that's a good one. You almost had me there. I'm not joking, Sarah. Tom pleaded. Come see for yourself. He grabbed her hand and dragged her towards the back door. Sarah followed Tom into the backyard, still chuckling. As they approached the hole, her laughter faded. The sight of the dark, gaping hole and the wooden coffin lying within was enough to silence anyone. Okay, she said, her voice now serious. That's definitely a coffin. Tom pointed to the nameplate. Look at this, Sarah. Read it. Sarah leaned closer, squinting in the fading light. She gasped. Thomas Elwood? But that's your name. A wave of disbelief washed over her. She knelt down and examined the coffin more closely. It looked ancient, the wood rotting and covered in moss. Tom, this is creepy, she said, standing up. Really creepy. Are you sure someone isn't playing a joke on you? I wish it was a joke, Tom replied, shaking his head. But it's not. I dug it up myself. What do we do? Sarah thought for a moment. We have to call the police, she said finally. This could be, I don't know, a crime scene or something. We can't just leave it there. Tom nodded in agreement. The police. That seemed like the only logical thing to do. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911, his hand trembling slightly. This whole situation was surreal, like something out of a horror movie. He just wanted it to be over. Within an hour, 2 police officers arrived at the house. They surveyed the scene with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Officer Miller, a young and eager rookie, took copious notes, while Officer Davies, a veteran with a world-weary expression, examined the coffin with a practiced eye. Well, I'll be, Officer Davies muttered, shaking his head. I've seen a lot of strange things in my time, but this takes the cake. They questioned Tom and Sarah, asking them to recount the events of the day. Tom explained how he had been digging the pool, how he had found the coffin, and how the nameplate bore his name. The officers listened intently, their expressions unreadable. After examining the coffin and the surrounding area, they admitted they were stumped. They decided to call in a historian and an archaeologist to help shed some light on the situation. The historian might know something about the history of the land, and the archaeologist could examine the remains and determine their age. As they waited for the experts to arrive, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he was living in a nightmare. He kept replaying the moment he saw his name on the coffin, the chilling realization that he was somehow connected to this macabre discovery. He just wanted answers, and he wanted them now. The pool seemed like a distant memory. The historian, a kindly woman named Dr. Albright, arrived first. She carried a large leather-bound book and a magnifying glass. She listened intently as Tom recounted his discovery, her expression growing more and more serious. After examining the area and consulting her book, Dr. Albright explained that the land on which Tom's house was built had once been a cemetery. It was a small, rural cemetery that had been used in the 1800s. When the town expanded, the cemetery was officially closed and most of the bodies were moved to a new location. However, Dr. Albright said it's not uncommon for some remains to be missed during these relocations. The records weren't always accurate, and sometimes the terrain made it difficult to find every single grave. She added that it was possible the coffin Tom had found was one of those forgotten remains. It explained why the coffin was so old and why it was buried so deep. But it didn't explain the nameplate. That was still a mystery. The revelation that his house was built on an old cemetery sent another shiver down Tom's spine. He couldn't believe he had been living on top of a graveyard all this time. It made the whole situation even more unsettling. He hoped the archaeologist would have some answers about the nameplate. The archaeologist, a young man named Ben, carefully examined the skeleton and the coffin. He used special tools to collect samples and take measurements. After a thorough examination, he confirmed that the remains were very old, likely dating back to the 1800s. The skeleton was mostly complete, but the bones were brittle and fragile. This person died a long time ago, Ben said. Based on the bone structure, I'd say they were probably in their late 20s or early 30s. He then turned his attention to the nameplate. He examined it closely, using a magnifying glass. This is interesting, he said. The metal and the etching technique suggest that this nameplate is more recent than the coffin itself. I'd estimate it's from the early 1900s, maybe even later. This revelation deepened the mystery. If the coffin and the skeleton were from the 1800s and the nameplate was from the 1900s, who put it there and why? Was it a mistake? Or was someone trying to play a cruel joke? Tom and Sarah exchanged worried glances. The situation was becoming more and more bizarre. They were no closer to finding answers and the questions just kept piling up. The pool was the last thing on their minds now. They just wanted to understand what was going on in their backyard. After the police and the experts left, Tom and Sarah decided to take matters into their own hands. They couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection between the coffin, the nameplate, and their family history. They decided to start researching their ancestry, hoping to find some clue that would explain the bizarre situation. They spent hours poring over old family records, birth certificates, death certificates, and census data. They searched online genealogy databases and visited the local library to access historical archives. They were looking for any mention of a Thomas Elwood in their family tree or any connection to the old cemetery. The research was tedious and time-consuming, but they were determined to uncover the truth. They learned about distant relatives they never knew existed, and they discovered fascinating stories about their ancestors' lives. Days turned into nights as they delved deeper into their family history. They were exhausted, but they refused to give up. They felt like they were on the verge of a breakthrough, that they were about to uncover a secret that had been buried for generations. The thought that there might be a logical explanation for the coffin and the nameplate kept them going. The pool was completely forgotten now, replaced by the urgent need to solve this mystery. Finally, after days of relentless searching, they found something. A distant relative, a great-great-uncle, also named Thomas Elwood. He had died young, in his early 20s, in the late 1800s. According to the records, he was supposed to be buried in the old cemetery, the very same one that Tom's house was built on. But here's the catch: there was no record of his body being moved when the cemetery was relocated. His name was on the list of those who were supposed to be transferred, but there was no confirmation that it actually happened. Tom and Sarah stared at each other in disbelief. Could it be possible? Had they found the original Thomas Elwood? Was the skeleton in the coffin their long-lost relative? It was a plausible explanation, but it didn't explain the nameplate. If the coffin contained the remains of their great-great-uncle, why was there a more recent nameplate with Tom's name on it? The mystery was far from solved. They needed more information, more clues. They decided to focus their investigation on the nameplate itself. Where could it have come from? Who could have put it there? They decided to visit local antique shops, hoping to find someone who recognized it. They visited several antique shops in town, showing the nameplate to the owners and asking if they recognized it. Most of them couldn't offer any help, but finally, at a small, dusty shop tucked away on a side street, they got a break. The owner, a wizened old man with a twinkle in his eye, examined the nameplate carefully. He ran his fingers over the inscription and studied the metal under a magnifying glass. He said thoughtfully. I've seen these before. These were popular in the early 1900s. People used them for all sorts of things. To mark graves, to label belongings, even as decorative pieces. He paused, stroking his chin. This particular style, I haven't seen one like this in years. It's definitely been added later, not original to the coffin. Tom and Sarah exchanged excited glances. They were finally getting somewhere. Do you have any idea who might have made it? Or where it might have come from? Tom asked eagerly. The antique shop owner shook his head. No, I'm sorry. These were mass-produced. But, wait a minute. He rummaged through a box of old receipts. I think I remember selling one of these a while back. Let me see. He pulled out a faded receipt and squinted at it. Yes, I sold one just like this about 5 years ago. He looked up at Tom. To a rather odd fellow, if I recall correctly. He was very interested in the old cemetery. Do you remember anything else about him? Sarah asked, her voice filled with anticipation. Anything that could help us find him? The antique shop owner thought for a moment, scratching his head. He was a tall, thin fellow with a nervous twitch, always wore a dark coat, even in summer, and he had a peculiar interest in names. He kept asking me about different names, their origins, their meanings. He paused, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. I think he mentioned he was a collector of sorts. He collected oddities, things that most people wouldn't want. Tom and Sarah exchanged a knowing glance. This was their guy. They had to find him. Do you have his name or any contact information? Tom asked. The antique shop owner shook his head. I'm afraid not. He paid in cash and he didn't leave a name. But I remember he lived on the outskirts of town, near the old Blackwood Forest. Maybe someone there knows him. Blackwood Forest. That was a start. Tom and Sarah thanked the antique shop owner and hurried out of the shop, their minds racing. They had a new lead, a new direction. The truth was within reach. The pool was a distant memory, replaced by the thrill of the chase. They were determined to find the strange man who had purchased the nameplate and put it on the coffin. They were going to unravel this mystery no matter what it took. The next day, Tom and Sarah drove to Blackwood Forest, a sprawling area of dense woods and winding roads on the outskirts of town. They showed the antique shop owner's description to the locals, asking if they recognized the strange man. After hours of searching, they finally found someone who knew him. An old woman who ran a small general store remembered seeing him walking in the woods. She pointed them to a secluded cabin deep in the forest. Tom and Sarah drove to the cabin, their hearts pounding in their chests. They parked the car and approached the cabin cautiously. Tom knocked on the door. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, thin man with a nervous twitch wearing a dark coat. It was the man from the antique shop. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Are you the one who bought a nameplate from the antique shop a few years ago?" Tom asked, his voice firm. The man's eyes widened. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he admitted. "I did. Did you put that nameplate on a coffin in the old cemetery?" Tom pressed. The man looked down at the ground, shamefaced. "Yes," he mumbled. "I did. It was just a prank. I thought it would be funny. I didn't know anyone would actually find it." Tom was a mixture of relief and anger. It was just a prank, a senseless act of vandalism. But it had caused him and Sarah days of anxiety and sleepless nights. He wanted to yell at the man, to demand an explanation, but he saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. "Why?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do something like that?" The man shrugged, his eyes filled with a strange mix of guilt and shame. "I don't know," he mumbled. "I just thought it would be interesting. I never meant to cause any harm." Tom shook his head, disgusted. He knew he couldn't change what had happened. The best he could do was make sure it didn't happen again. He decided not to press charges, but he warned the man to stay away from the old cemetery. Afterward, Tom and Sarah returned home, exhausted but relieved. The mystery of the nameplate was solved, but the coffin and the skeleton remained. Tom decided to do the right thing. He contacted a local funeral home and arranged to have the remains properly reburied in a new cemetery. He felt it was the least he could do for their long-lost relative, Thomas Elwood. It took a few weeks, but Tom finally got back to building his pool. He hired a professional this time, deciding he'd had enough of digging. As the construction crew worked, Tom often found himself thinking about the coffin and the skeleton. The whole experience had been surreal, like something out of a movie. He still felt a twinge of unease whenever he looked at the pool, but it was fading. The pool was finally taking shape, a sparkling oasis in his backyard. He could almost hear the laughter of his kids, the splashing of water, the happy chatter of friends. He learned a valuable lesson about respecting the past, about honoring those who came before him. He realized that his house wasn't just a building, it was a part of a larger story, a story that stretched back centuries. And sometimes, when he was lounging by the pool, sipping lemonade, he would tell the story of the coffin and the nameplate. It was a funny, if slightly creepy, story to tell. And it always reminded him of the importance of respecting the past and the unexpected surprises that life can throw your way even when you're just trying to build a pool. The pool was finished, but the story would live on.